It started with a sealed red folder carried through Buckingham Palace just after dawn, an emergency decree no courtier was prepared to explain and no royal aide dared discuss openly. But when Catherine emerged from the king's private chamber with tears in her eyes and senior officials suddenly changed their titles overnight, the silence inside the palace became impossible to contain. Something extraordinary had happened behind those guarded doors. And according to whispers now spreading through royal corridors, the monarchy may have quietly crossed into a constitutional moment, unlike anything seen in generations. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Reports suggest the crisis began in the darkest hours of the morning, when King Charles III suffered what palace sources are calling a sudden medical setback during his ongoing treatment. No official alarm was raised to the public. No dramatic statement was released. But inside the palace, the machinery of monarchy moved with terrifying speed. William was summoned. Catherine was brought in. Privy Council officials, legal advisors, and senior household staff were reportedly pulled into an emergency meeting before sunrise, as if the crown itself had entered a danger zone no one wanted to name aloud. And then came the folder. Sealed, guarded, passed between senior aides under unusual security. To outsiders, it may have looked like another piece of palace paperwork. But insiders whisper that this was no ordinary royal file. It was said to contain an emergency decree, one prepared for a moment when stability, duty, and succession could no longer be treated as distant concerns. In that tense atmosphere, Catherine allegedly received the temporary designation Acting Queen Mother. An internal arrangement so unprecedented that even experienced courtiers were said to be stunned by its implications. The title did not mean a coronation. It did not mean the throne had changed hands. But emotionally, symbolically, and institutionally, it meant Catherine had been moved into a role of extraordinary trust. Palace staff were reportedly instructed not to discuss the decree. Certain ceremonial details around Catherine quietly shifted. Her presence became more protected, more central, more deliberate. Royal correspondents began noticing small changes that felt too coordinated to be accidental. And when Buckingham Palace refused to clearly deny the reports, speculation only deepened. For Catherine, the weight of that moment must have been crushing. She was no longer standing only as William's wife or the Princess of Wales. She was being positioned as a living bridge between a weakened king, a future monarch, and a nation watching for signs of fear behind the palace gates. That is why her tears mattered. That is why the silence mattered. Because in royal history, the most powerful decisions are often not announced with trumpets. They are hidden in folders, whispered through corridors, and understood only when the palace suddenly begins behaving differently. But the shocking title itself was only part of the story, because hidden inside the decree was a deeper royal contingency plan decades in the making. For years, royal insiders insisted the monarchy had prepared for every constitutional crisis imaginable. Yet few believed those secret contingency files would ever be activated while the king still sat on the throne. Until now. Because sometime shortly before sunrise, reports suggest Buckingham Palace quietly initiated protocols usually reserved for moments of national instability, and Catherine stood at the center of them all. Reports claim King Charles experienced a sudden overnight health complication that sent private alarm through the royal household. Nothing was shouted publicly. Nothing was confirmed in dramatic language. But behind the palace's careful silence, emergency communications were allegedly sent between Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and Clarence House, with a speed that suggested something deeper than routine concern. The monarchy, so often built on calm faces and measured words, appeared to be moving under pressure. Catherine was reportedly summoned before several senior royals despite the unusually early hour, and that detail alone shook those who understood palace rhythm. Catherine is trusted, respected, and increasingly central, but to be called into such a meeting before dawn meant the matter was not ordinary. It meant the crown was not simply discussing health. It was discussing continuity. Stability. The terrifying possibility that Britain might wake one morning asking who truly held the emotional authority of the monarchy if the king could no longer carry the full burden alone. Legal experts tied to the crown were reportedly asked to review succession-adjacent procedures, not because the throne had changed, but because the institution feared uncertainty. Palace insiders whisper that the phrase temporary continuity authority began circulating in the room, a phrase that sounded cold on paper but devastating in meaning. It suggested that the monarchy needed someone who could steady public confidence without triggering panic, someone close enough to the future king to symbolize transition, yet trusted enough by the public to soften the shock. And that is where Catherine's name became unavoidable. William was reportedly seen appearing unusually tense during private movements around the palace, carrying the look of a man forced to balance loyalty to his father with responsibility to the future. His silence only fed speculation. His seriousness suggested the decision was not symbolic theater. It was strategic survival. Catherine's new position, according to growing palace whispers, was designed to reassure the country before fear could take control of the story. She represented continuity without aggression, authority without ambition, and duty without spectacle. That made her valuable in a moment when every gesture from the palace could be read as weakness or preparation. But the more her role expanded, the more one question began cutting through the official calm like a blade. Yet as officials scrambled behind palace walls, another question quietly emerged: why Catherine? And why now? The phrase itself stunned even veteran royal watchers. Acting Queen Mother was not a title the public expected to hear in modern Britain, especially while both the reigning monarch and Queen Camilla remained officially present within the institution. But according to palace administrative whispers, the designation was never intended to replace anyone. It was allegedly designed for something far more strategic. In palace language, titles are never just words. They are signals. They are warnings. They are pieces of power wrapped in ceremony. And that is why this phrase caused such quiet shock. Royal historians would immediately understand the emotional weight behind it, because the memory of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, still carries a powerful meaning inside the monarchy. She was not remembered only as a widow, or a mother, or a figure beside the throne. She became a symbol of endurance when the crown needed warmth, courage, and public trust. So when Catherine's name was reportedly linked to anything resembling that role, the message felt impossible to ignore. Palace aides allegedly used the term internally rather than announcing it to the public, and that silence made the matter even more intriguing. If it had been harmless, some argued, why hide it? If it was only ceremonial, why guard the wording so carefully? The answer, according to those following the royal administrative trail, may be that Catherine's new designation was not built for public applause. It was built for continuity. It gave the monarchy a way to place her at the emotional center of the institution without forcing a formal constitutional rupture. Almost immediately, whispers began that Catherine was assuming expanded ceremonial oversight responsibilities. Not in a loud, triumphant way, not through public boasting, but through quiet adjustments, the kind the palace has always preferred. Invitations, order of precedence, briefings, appearances. The small gears of monarchy began turning around her with unusual care. And for those who study royal behavior, those small movements can reveal more than any statement ever could. The comparisons to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, became impossible to avoid. During moments of national anxiety, she had represented steadiness, sacrifice, and a refusal to abandon duty. Catherine, in this new chapter, was being framed in a similar emotional language: calm under pressure, loyal without drama, strong without appearing hungry for power. Some insiders believed this was the true reason behind the designation. Catherine had become the monarchy's emotional anchor at the exact moment King Charles's health concerns made the institution feel more fragile than ever. But with trust comes tension. Quiet resistance reportedly began forming among certain royal factions after the decree circulated, because Catherine's rise meant someone else's influence was shrinking. Media outlets began asking whether this was not merely a temporary emergency measure, but the first visible sign of a broader transition inside the firm. And once that question entered the public conversation, the palace could no longer fully control what people believed was happening. But behind the ceremonial language and constitutional caution, there was another force pushing this decision forward: Prince William himself. Long before the public heard whispers of emergency decrees or temporary royal authority, Prince William had reportedly been preparing for a moment exactly like this. And according to insiders familiar with the palace's internal dynamics, the future king had already reached one painful conclusion. If the monarchy entered a period of instability, Catherine would have to become its emotional center immediately. For William, this was not simply about affection or loyalty. It was about survival. Reports suggest he had watched the pressure around King Charles's illness grow heavier with each passing month, while the public searched every royal appearance for signs of weakness, hesitation, or hidden fear. And in that silence, William allegedly understood what the palace could not openly admit: the monarchy needed a figure who could steady the nation without creating panic. A figure who could carry emotional authority before constitutional authority was ever discussed. That figure was Catherine. Senior courtiers were reportedly divided over how visible Catherine should become during the king's illness. Some believed too much prominence would spark speculation about Charles's condition. Others feared that keeping her in the background would make the institution appear unprepared. But William, according to palace whispers, argued for what insiders described as continuity through trust. Not through force, not through sudden public drama, through the calm confidence Catherine had built over years of discipline, restraint, and quiet service. This was where the decision became deeply personal. Palace insiders claim William trusts Catherine more than almost any other royal figure, because she understands the weight of the crown without needing to possess it. She does not rush toward power. She absorbs pressure. She softens fear. She gives the public something the monarchy desperately needs in moments of uncertainty: reassurance without explanation. And for a future king facing the possible fragility of his father's reign, that kind of trust becomes more than emotional support. It becomes strategy. Catherine was increasingly linked to sensitive diplomatic and ceremonial preparations, according to royal observers. Nothing was announced in blunt terms, yet her presence around important planning reportedly grew more deliberate. Every added responsibility seemed to confirm what insiders had begun whispering, that this was not a symbolic gesture, but a carefully built continuity strategy for the crown. Comparisons were quickly drawn to Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip's wartime-style partnership, not because the roles were identical, but because the emotional pattern felt familiar. One royal carrying constitutional destiny, the other becoming the force that steadies the burden behind it. William may be the heir, but Catherine was being shaped as the stabilizing hand beside him, the quiet strength that could help the monarchy survive a moment of fear without appearing broken. And that is why the decree mattered so much. It was not merely about a title. It was about William making clear that Catherine had become central to the future architecture of the institution. However, as Catherine's influence quietly expanded, not everyone inside royal circles welcomed the shift in power. What began as an emergency health response soon evolved into something far more dangerous, a silent struggle over who would control the monarchy during one of the most fragile moments of Charles's reign. Because according to multiple palace interpretations, the decree naming Catherine carried consequences far beyond symbolism. It changed influence, access, visibility, and inside the royal household, that changed everything. At first, the palace tried to treat the matter as routine continuity planning. Calm words, careful denials, controlled silence. But behind that polished surface, certain factions were reportedly deeply uncomfortable with Catherine's sudden authority. Not because she had seized anything, not because she had demanded a role. That was what made the shift so powerful. Catherine's influence appeared to rise precisely because she had never looked hungry for it. And in a royal world built on rank, access, and invisible hierarchies, quiet trust can be more threatening than open ambition. Senior aides were allegedly divided over how much public power should now be concentrated around William and Catherine. Some believed the monarchy needed them front and center to reassure the nation. Others feared that moving too quickly would make Charles's condition appear worse than the palace was willing to admit. Every adjustment carried risk. Every absence became a clue. Every appearance sparked a fresh wave of questions. And slowly, what had begun as a private emergency transformed into a political storm inside the firm itself. Reports suggest ceremonial changes quietly began to sideline other royal figures. Responsibilities were redirected, invitations were reviewed. Private briefings seemed to place Catherine closer to the center of decision-making than before. Nothing was declared with blunt force, but the message was unmistakable to anyone who understood palace language. Catherine was no longer being treated only as support for the heir. She was becoming the face of reassurance. That created tension. Media insiders claimed the unease inside the palace became unusually visible, not through open confrontation, but through pauses, controlled statements, and the strange absence of clarity. Royal commentators described the atmosphere as controlled panic beneath polished tradition, and that phrase captured the moment perfectly. Outside, the monarchy wanted calm. Inside, it was reportedly calculating how to protect itself from fear, rumor, and the terrifying question of what came next. Yet the more the palace tried to contain the story, the more public support for Catherine surged. Secrecy fueled fascination. Her silence made her seem stronger. Her restraint made her appear more prepared. People began reading her not as a figure being pushed forward, but as someone the institution could lean on when confidence was trembling. That contrast was devastating for those who had expected the old order to hold unchanged. Because influence in the royal family rarely shifts with a loud announcement. It moves through trust, timing, and necessity. And by the time Catherine's role became impossible to ignore, the palace had already entered a new internal reality, one where every faction understood that the future was arriving faster than anyone had dared admit. But the most emotional moment was still to come, because the king himself was reportedly preparing one final message about Catherine's future role. By the time the emergency meetings finally ended, one truth reportedly haunted everyone inside Buckingham Palace. King Charles understood the monarchy was entering uncertain territory faster than anyone expected. And according to sources close to royal administrative circles, the decree involving Catherine may have reflected not panic, but preparation for a future Charles feared was approaching far too quickly. Reports suggest Charles personally approved Catherine's expanded responsibilities, and that detail changed the emotional meaning of everything. This was not simply a decision made by restless courtiers or ambitious planners hiding behind palace walls. It was, according to whispers, the king's own recognition that the crown needed protection beyond his strength alone. For a monarch raised under the long shadow of Queen Elizabeth II, that realization would not have been easy. It would have carried grief, duty, and the unbearable knowledge that legacy sometimes demands decisions the heart is not ready to make. Palace insiders claim Charles wanted stability protected above all else, not appearances, not pride. Stability, because in moments of royal fragility, the greatest threat is not always the illness itself. It is uncertainty. It is the silence that invites panic. It is the fear that the institution may be less prepared than it appears. And Charles, reportedly aware of this danger, looked toward Catherine as someone who could preserve public trust without forcing the monarchy into open alarm. That trust mattered. Catherine had spent years building a public image rooted in restraint, patience, and quiet service. She had endured scrutiny without turning every wound into spectacle. She had carried personal pressure while still appearing devoted to the wider duty of the crown. And according to reports, Charles saw in her something the monarchy desperately needed: a calming force strong enough to hold attention, but humble enough not to look like a challenge. The comparisons to Queen Elizabeth II's long-term planning philosophy became increasingly emotional. Elizabeth had understood that monarchy survives not by reacting loudly to every crisis, but by preparing quietly before the crisis becomes visible. If these palace whispers are accurate, Charles may have been following that same logic. The decree was not a confession of defeat. It was a shield, a way of ensuring that if his strength faltered, the institution would not falter with him. Catherine was allegedly moved by the gravity of what had been placed upon her. This was not a ceremonial promotion wrapped in glamour. It was a burden, a sacred responsibility tied to fear, family, and history. William, meanwhile, reportedly remained protective yet deeply focused, standing beside her not only as a husband, but as the heir who understood that the future was beginning to press against the present. Palace staff described the atmosphere as emotional, tense, and historically significant. And once Charles's private decision began moving through the royal system, the decree stopped feeling like a rumor and started feeling like a turning point. Yet while the palace fought to contain the story, the outside world was already beginning to realize that history may have quietly changed overnight. The moment the phrase "acting Queen Mother" leaked beyond palace walls, the reaction was immediate. Commentators scrambled. Constitutional experts hesitated. Royal loyalists flooded social media with concern, confusion, and admiration. Because whether officially confirmed or not, many believed they were witnessing the beginning of a profound transformation inside the House of Windsor, and Catherine had suddenly become its visible center. Public fascination exploded because the phrase carried too much weight to ignore. It sounded ancient, intimate, and powerful all at once. Some saw it as a symbolic reassurance, a way for the palace to calm the nation during uncertainty. Others believed it suggested something operational, a quiet transfer of emotional authority while the king's health remained the question no one could ask too loudly. And because Buckingham Palace continued avoiding direct clarification, every silence became fuel. Every careful answer created another wave of speculation. Royal commentators began debating whether Catherine's reported designation was ceremonial, symbolic, or something deeper. The palace may have hoped the phrase would remain buried inside administrative language, but once it reached the public, it became impossible to contain. People began asking why Catherine had been chosen, why the decree had been prepared, and why the monarchy seemed so determined not to explain it plainly. The mystery gave the story power. The lack of denial made it feel even more serious. Amid the uncertainty, Catherine was widely praised for her composure. That praise mattered, because it revealed something the palace already seemed to understand. The public trusted her. She had become, in the eyes of many, a figure of steadiness during a time when the institution felt fragile. Her calm was read as strength. Her restraint was read as dignity. And her silence, rather than weakening her position, made her appear even more suited to the burden now reportedly placed upon her. But beneath the admiration lay a darker concern. Questions surrounding the king's long-term health outlook intensified. If there was no serious danger, why were emergency protocols being discussed? If the decree was harmless, why was the palace so careful with its words? These questions spread quickly, and with each one, William and Catherine were increasingly viewed as the monarchy's stabilizing future. Not someday. Not in theory. But now, in the middle of an unfolding crisis. Media narratives shifted almost overnight. The story was no longer only about Charles's health or Catherine's unusual title. It became a conversation about transition, generational change, and the hidden machinery that keeps the crown alive when certainty begins to fracture. The palace wanted control, but the public sensed movement. And once people sense movement inside the monarchy, they start looking for meaning in every detail. That was the real shockwave. Catherine's name had become attached not simply to reassurance, but to the future itself. And as Britain searched for answers, one final reality began settling over the palace like a shadow no aide could silence anymore. Behind the towering gates of Buckingham Palace, beneath the centuries of protocol and silence, one truth now appears impossible to ignore. The monarchy is preparing for a future it once hoped remained years away. And in the middle of that uncertain transition stands Catherine, no longer simply the Princess of Wales, but perhaps the emotional bridge between an aging reign and the next royal era waiting beyond it. Reports suggest Catherine's role is now being seen as central to royal continuity, not because she demanded power, but because the institution appears to need what she represents. Calm, trust, discipline, a steady hand when the crown feels surrounded by questions it cannot answer openly. The emergency decree, once whispered about as a guarded palace document, has now become something larger in the public imagination. It has become a symbol of transition, a sign that the monarchy may already be arranging itself around the reality of what comes next. William and Catherine are increasingly framed as the future guardians of the crown, not through sudden announcement, but through the quiet gravity of necessity. William carries the burden of inheritance. Catherine carries the burden of reassurance. Together, they now appear to stand at the edge of a new royal chapter, one shaped not by celebration, but by uncertainty, illness, and the painful discipline of preparation. That contrast makes the moment powerful. The monarchy is not moving forward in triumph. It is moving forward under pressure. And yet Charles, according to palace whispers, remains determined to preserve stability despite worsening strain around him. That determination matters, because it shows a king trying to protect the crown even while his own reign feels increasingly shadowed by fragility. His reported approval of Catherine's expanded role may be remembered not as surrender, but as sacrifice, the choice of a monarch who understood that legacy must sometimes be guarded by those who will inherit it. Still, palace secrecy has only deepened public fascination. Every careful phrase, every unanswered question, every refusal to clarify the decree has made the story feel more significant. The silence has become part of the drama. It suggests that what is happening behind closed doors may be too sensitive, too emotional, or too historic to explain plainly. The House of Windsor has now entered a more fragile and emotionally charged chapter. Legacy, duty, and continuity have become the defining themes of this unfolding crisis. Catherine's reported rise, William's quiet resolve, and Charles's desperate need for stability all point toward the same truth: the crown is preparing itself for change before the world is ready to witness it. Because within the House of Windsor, power is rarely announced the moment it changes, and sometimes history begins not with a coronation, but with a whisper behind palace doors. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.